Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are diving into one of the most intellectually charged discussions happening right now in the creative arts. We're focusing specifically on generative AI systems and really drilling down on Fable Studios' concept of Showrunner. Look, this isn't just about faster rendering or, cheaper special effects. It's potentially about a revolutionary transformation that challenges our very definition of creativity itself.
Yes. The generative capabilities that are, emerging in creative fields are certainly game-changing. I don't think anyone disputes that. But we need to be really precise about what is being changed and how we classify this technology correctly.
Exactly. And that brings us to our central question. It hinges on whether this AI technology has crossed some kind of critical threshold. So does a system like Showrunner constitute a fundamentally new artistic medium, one that redefines the very structure of authorship? Or is it better understood as just a highly advanced tool, maybe an evolution of a platform that changes but ultimately doesn't replace the traditional human author? My position is that these systems are, by their very nature, a new, actively creative and autonomous medium.
And I come at it from a slightly different angle. While I absolutely acknowledge the immense complexity and the innovation here, it's quite remarkable, I'd argue that this technology remains fundamentally an evolution of the tool and the platform structure we already understand. The human role shifts, yes, maybe dramatically, shifting from direct scriptwriter to system architect, the essential world builder, as some are calling it, but they retain that ultimate structural control and therefore authorship.
See, I argue that AI has decisively moved beyond being just a passive instrument. Think about it, a pencil or a paintbrush, right? Those are passive tools. They have to be guided line by line, stroke by human intent. Showrunner feels different. It's described as actively creative, capable of generating original narratives, complex characters, even persistent worlds, autonomously once you give it that initial prompt. This emergence of novel content, stuff the original programmer maybe didn't even foresee, well, it simply cannot be contained within the old category of tool. It just feels bigger. It demands recognition as a new medium altogether, something like a hybrid, intelligent, remixable, and importantly, playable form. It feels distinct from traditional cinema or even, closed-loop gaming.
Okay, I see why this sheer volume and, frankly, the speed of the output could lead you to that conclusion. It's impressive. But I think we have to look upstream, right, at the source of the system's cohesion. The material itself, the descriptions we have, they define this new human role as the world builder, the individual who designs the foundational environment, the character systems, the logical constraints, basically the sandbox within which these AI-driven plots evolve. Now, this is a supervisory role, an architectural role, and I argue that is a defining act of authorship. It's high-level control.
But where do you draw the line between architecture and active creation? I mean, Saatchi drew that analogy, didn't he, to chess grandmasters facing Deep Blue. The point was the AI isn't just mimicking human styles, it's generating original creative work that can surprise even its creators. Take Fable's early South Park simulation. They designed the environment, sure, but then they allowed these AI-generated residents to live out daily routines based on logical rules. And the key part is that the episodes reportedly emerge naturally from their complex internal interactions. That emergent quality, the story being generated by the simulation's own logic, well, that feels like the hallmark of a new medium to me.
That's a compelling point. Based on the output, I grant you. But I would frame that emergence differently. The autonomy of the AI, as impressive as it seems, is predicated entirely on the complexity of the foundational program that a human built. The claim that Showrunner creates these cohesive, living story worlds with necessary continuity, where characters behave consistently, environments remain stable, like, the rooms and friends always be in the same spatial relationship, that continuity is crucial. And how's it achieved? It's achieved through simulation and persistent world design. And just to be clear for listeners, persistent world design basically means the state of the world.
things like character memories, where objects are, the rules of physics or society, is maintained across generations of output. This isn't just random generation spitting things out. It's a really high-level system design task.
It's advanced programming, and it originates with complex human intent and architecture. If you remove that world builder's framework, you don't get a medium. You get, well, noise, randomness, inert code. It needs that human structure.
I appreciate that clarification, truly. But focusing solely on the input, the architecture, it risks missing the revolution in the output, doesn't it? If the system is capable of generating, say, a 22-minute episode of The Simpsons, where Moe makes a choice that genuinely advances the plot, a choice the human architect never specifically coded or foresaw, well, who is the author of that specific narrative innovation? A pencil can't do that. It feels like the system has some active creative agency there.
I'd say the system has high-fidelity execution agency, certainly. It is running the logical consequences of the architectural design. So if the architect designs a character, Moe, to be deeply cynical and perpetually frustrated, and then the system places him in a highly stressful situation, the system's output, maybe Moe burns down his own bar, who knows, is still arguably a deterministic, though incredibly complex outcome stemming from those initial human-authored design parameters. The complexity feels computational, not necessarily creative in the human sense of originating something entirely new from nothing.
That feels a little like trying to shrink true emergence back down to just deterministic programming. You're essentially arguing that because the system is running code, the human must retain full authorship. But the capacity for the AI to generate a coherent, novel narrative based on those rules, that seems to move it past tool status for me. Okay, let's maybe look at the commercial consequences, because I think that's where the distinction between tool and medium might become starkest.
Yes, let's definitely discuss the commercial side, because actually, this is where I see perhaps the strongest evidence for the platform argument. If the output is essentially a blend of existing forms like television and games, creating a playable story, does this merger, this complexity, inherently constitute a new medium? Or is it just the ultimate advanced platform for combining existing media types? You mentioned the analogy of audiences participating, remixing, expanding stories. That sounds an awful lot like modding in gaming, doesn't it? I mean, consider the example of Dota emerging from Warcraft 3. That was a radical community expansion, arguably creating entirely new genres within gaming. But nobody really argues that Dota itself constituted a new medium distinct from gaming. It was seen as an expansion of the Warcraft 3 platform and its intellectual property ecosystem, driven largely by fan engagement and creativity on that platform.
Yeah, okay, but I'm not quite convinced by that line of reasoning. The analogy to modding, I think it fails to capture the truly radical structural and commercial transformation that seems inherent in Showrunner's vision. Modding usually requires specialized knowledge, right? Distribution channels are often informal, ad hoc, and ownership is, well, it's often nebulous, frequently resting firmly with the original IP holder, like Blizzard in your example. The vision described here feels fundamentally different. Imagine a major studio launching a new film, okay? But alongside it, they launch its full generative story world model using something like Showrunner. By, say, Sunday afternoon, the community has already generated thousands of new, structurally sound, maybe even feature-length episodes centered on secondary characters, and crucially, this is the key part in this envisioned model. Those fan-made episodes are potentially legally owned by their creators and monetizable almost instantly.
That is a colossal commercial shift, I grant you. The ownership and monetization aspect is huge.
It's structural transformation. The medium isn't just defined by its aesthetics, right? It's also defined by its economic relationship to creation and consumption. Existing categories, film, television, even gaming as we currently define it, they just can't easily accommodate a system where IP consumption becomes instantaneous IP generation and commerce. This capacity for community creation and instant legal monetization, all built atop an autonomously generating narrative engine. That, to me, is the definitive sign of a new medium structure taking shape.
But wait, this radical change in licensing and commerce, as significant as it is Isn't that a legal and economic platform innovation built on existing IP? Is it really a fundamental change in the creative material itself? I mean, if the fan creating that monetized episode set in Moe's Bar is still relying on the visual assets, the character archetypes, the established lore of The Simpsons, isn't the system then functioning as an incredibly powerful IP delivery and amplification tool? It sounds like the ultimate IP utilization platform, not necessarily a whole new medium. The foundational creative impulse, the architecture of Springfield, the rules, still belong to the human world builder, doesn't it?
And let me just push back slightly on the ownership point you raised earlier.
If a fan creates and monetizes, say, 1,000 episodes set within the Simpsons showrunner system, who created the underlying structure that ensures Homer doesn't suddenly start speaking fluent Mandarin or, break the fundamental rules of that world? It's the world builder, the person who defined the logical rules in the character continuity. The revenue stream might change dramatically, yes, but the foundational authorship of the medium's inherent structure seems to remain human.
But I think you're confusing the source material, the Simpsons IP, with the generative process itself. No one is arguing the AI system invented Homer Simpson. Of course not. We're arguing that the generative capacity itself, the engine, is the medium. It's maybe like the difference between a cinematographer who operates the tool and the cinema itself, the medium. This new medium allows for the continuous, coherent, and commercially viable generation of entirely new, complex narratives that literally didn't exist an hour ago. That is what transforms the relationship between the author, the work, and the audience. And we also have to address these limiting perceptions we're seeing across industries. We hear warnings that many people in Hollywood are kind of shrinking AI into old categories, treating it as merely a cheaper way to produce VFX or animation. That kind of intellectual reductionism, I think it limits our conceptual understanding of what's possible.
The true structural change might be this shift away from the singular human author crafting a fixed piece towards an endlessly generative system built on simulation. That generative system is the medium.
Okay, look, I wholeheartedly agree that minimizing AI's potential is a major conceptual mistake. That's absolutely right. But the core tension, for me, remains. Does AI's ability to generate endless content actually eliminate the human author? Or do we simply redefine the author's primary role as the architect of the simulation engine itself? The debate really hinges, I think, on whether we define the medium by the continuous flow of the output, the stories, or by the underlying architecture, the persistent, rule-based system that enables that flow. If the world builder is the one who defines the rules that guarantee the character continuity and the logical believability, which Fable itself describes as the key innovation, then the human arguably remains the source of the medium's defining structure. The tool is just, it's incredibly advanced. So advanced it can carry out the logical consequences of the architect's design with potentially infinite variation.
But that variation, that novel emergence, that's exactly what defines the system's independent creative capacity, isn't it? You've successfully described the human author as, yes, the foundation layer. I agreed. But a building isn't defined only by its foundation. It's defined by the structures built upon it. When the system starts generating those structures, new plots, unexpected character developments, novel dialogues, things the architect didn't specifically pre-authorize or even imagine, the system itself becomes the medium. It operates under human instruction, broadly, yes, but it is actively creative in its execution. The definition of a medium involves its capacity to express and disseminate. And this new structure expresses and disseminates stories autonomously within a defined world. That feels like a medium.
And I'd counter that no human architect designs a house without intending the roof to keep out the rain, right? The simulation logic, the persistent design that is the ultimate intent, the fact that the AI might choose the precise shade of gray paint for the roof, or the exact sequence of events leading to Moe's frustration boiling over, feels like sophisticated execution within that intent, not a radical departure in creative medium. The human establishes the system's telos, its purpose and its end goal, and that systemic purpose ultimately governs the story world.
The telos of a generative system structurally seems to be infinite novelty within constraints, whereas the telos of traditional cinema or literature is usually the single fixed authored narrative. That distinction between fixed authorial intent embodied in a single work and an endless emergent novelty tied to completely new commercial structures that feels too radical to just call it an advanced platform.
And I still maintain that the human-authored system model is the medium. The generative output is the content produced by that medium, however complex and surprising that content might be.
Ultimately, for me, the sheer generative capacity and the resulting transformation, the way it changes the relationship between IP ownership, commerce, and community creation, it signals a definitive break from the passive instruments of the past. This active, emergent quality, capable of sustained, potentially monetizable narrative creation, feels like it defines the dawn of a new, actively creative medium.
And while the powerful evolution of generative AI is undeniable, absolutely undeniable, the continued necessity of the world builder, the human, to establish the persistent worlds, the continuity, the logical rules, that tells me the technology functions primarily as an immensely powerful platform and toolset, one fundamentally governed by human design and architectural intention. The human, therefore, remains the primary source of the medium's underlying structure, even if the output is vast and varied.
Well, it's clear that regardless of how we label it precisely, the rise of systems like Showrunner fundamentally challenges that long-standing boundary between author and audience, doesn't it? It seems to be shifting towards something more like a collaborative intelligence system.
Agreed, and recognizing the precise location and the nature of human structural control within that evolving system is absolutely crucial if we're going to understand the true trajectory of storytelling and, indeed, the future of intellectual property.